Before the bobcat, before the rescue, there was just a boy, and the mountain that raised him. The morning light in the Blue Ridge Mountains has a way of speaking softly. It doesn't rush. It doesn't demand attention. It simply arrives slow and golden, stretching across misty ridges, like an old friend touching your shoulder to say, "You're still here." That's how Ethan Rowe learned to greet the world. Not with noise, but with noticing. He was born in a wooden cabin tucked behind a line of birch trees near the border of Pisgah National Forest. His parents ran a small trail lodge, a place hikers stopped for warm coffee and stories of weather bears and the endless hush of the Appalachian wild. From the outside, their life looked quiet. But for Ethan, every day was an unfolding wonder. While other kids collected baseball cards, he collected feathers, each one labeled carefully with the name of the bird and the date it fell. He kept a journal smudged with mud and graphite where he sketched paw prints he found near the creek. Sometimes at dusk, he'd sneak out barefoot to sit by the water just to listen. Crickets, owls, the low hum of wind through pine. That was the language he understood best. His mother, Mira, used to laugh softly and call him my listener. "You don't just look at animals, Ethan," she'd say. "You wait for them to trust you first." It was a strange kind of childhood by modern standards. No noise, no screens, just the rhythm of nature. But those years gave him something that would later shape his entire life, a deep, patient kind of attention. The kind that doesn't rush to fix or control, but to care, quietly. One autumn evening when he was 9, he found a wounded barn owl tangled in fishing line near the lodge's woodpile. The owl's eyes were wide with fear, one wing dragged uselessly in the dirt. Ethan didn't shout for help. He didn't panic. He just sat a few feet away, whispering the only words he knew. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." It took him nearly an hour to crawl close enough to cut the line. The owl trembled in his hands, heart fluttering like a tiny drum. He carried it inside, wrapped it in his own flannel shirt, and set it near the fire. His mother found him still awake past midnight, holding that bird as if it were a piece of his own heart. They called a local wildlife volunteer who came the next morning to take the owl for proper care. Before leaving, she placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder and said, "You've got something rare, kid. Not everyone listens the way you do." That sentence stuck, like a seed planted deep in him. Years later, when people asked why he chose to work with wild animals, Ethan would smile and say, "I didn't choose them. They just never stopped calling." It wasn't a loud calling. It came in quiet forms, like the way dew gathered on spider webs, or how deer froze mid-step at sunrise heads, tilted, listening to the same unseen rhythm he'd always felt. His parents nurtured that connection without turning it into a performance. They gave him chores that kept his hands busy mending fences, stacking firewood, but they also gave him space to wander. Space to become the person who'd rather rescue a field mouse from a rain barrel than spend Saturday nights in town. By the time Ethan turned 16, he was already volunteering at the local animal shelter. He learned how to bottle feed orphaned kittens, treat minor wounds, and clean enclosures without frightening their small inhabitants. It wasn't glamorous work, but it mattered to him. Every life he touched, no matter how fragile, reminded him of something simple yet profound. Love isn't loud. It's consistent. That same year, a forest ranger named Daniel came through the lodge. Over a plate of Mira's cornbread, he told stories about his work tracking bears, tagging elk, helping wildlife navigate a world that was getting smaller every year. Ethan listened like someone hearing his own future spoken aloud. That night, he walked outside after dinner, watching the stars burn gently over the ridges. He realized he didn't want to just love nature from a distance. He wanted to protect it, not as a dream, but as a daily act. After high school, Ethan studied wildlife rehabilitation at a small college in Asheville. He worked part-time at a vet clinic, often staying late to watch the techs perform procedures. He never craved attention or adventure. What he wanted was understanding, the kind that takes years to earn. When his classmates joked about getting rich with zoo jobs, Ethan just smiled. Rich, he said, is when the wild things stop running from you. That humility made him beloved by mentors. They often said, "You have the temperament of a good caretaker. Steady hands, soft eyes, patient voice." He didn't realize those traits would one day be tested beyond measure. On weekends, Ethan returned home to help his parents. His father had grown slower from years of trail maintenance, and Mira, always the heart of the family, had begun to show the first signs of fatigue. But she never lost her warmth. She'd wait on the porch each time he drove up, coffee mug in hand, waving before he even stepped out of the truck. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she said, "You've always had a kind heart, Ethan, but remember, kindness isn't about keeping things safe. Sometimes it's about letting them find their own strength." He nodded, not fully understanding yet, but those words would echo back to him years later, in a very different kind of goodbye. The mountains shaped him not only in skill, but in spirit. He learned that life in the wild runs on respect storm. Come rivers, flood, trees fall, and everything keeps going. There's a moral rhythm to it, one that humbles even the proudest heart. Ethan often said the mountain was his first teacher. From it, he learned that silence is not emptiness, it's awareness. That fear, when faced gently, becomes understanding. And that every creature, even the smallest, wants the same things we do: safety, belonging, and a place to rest. He carried these truths like quiet tools, ones he didn't know he'd soon need when the wild tested him in ways he'd never imagined. Years later, when he became a full-time rehabilitator at a wildlife sanctuary in North Carolina, people assumed he'd been born brave. But the truth is, courage was never loud in him. It was steady. He approached every animal the same way he once approached that frightened owl, with stillness first, then care. Colleagues would often remark how calm he was, even with the most unpredictable rescues. "Rose got mountain patience," they'd say. But Ethan knew it wasn't patience, it was reverence. A deep respect for life, even when it bites or claws or disappears into the trees. When we look back on our lives, we often remember the big milestones: graduations, first jobs, weddings. But sometimes the moments that shape us most happen quietly. A child whispering to a hurt bird. A mother reminding her son that love isn't ownership. A mountain teaches a boy how to listen. Those moments plant the kind of roots that don't break when storms come. For Ethan, those roots became the foundation of everything: his compassion, his resilience, and his ability to see the soul inside even the most fearful eyes. That's what made him the kind of man who wouldn't turn away years later when the forest called for help again. A call that came once more in the soft cry of something small and lost. We like to think that human kindness ends where the wilderness begins. But maybe it's the other way around. Maybe the wild doesn't divide us, it reminds us that our instincts to care, to shelter, to heal are just as natural as a bobcat's instinct to protect its young. It's not civilization versus wilderness. It's one long, beautiful attempt to coexist. Ethan never saw the wild as other. He saw it as family, rough, unpredictable, and honest. And family, as he'd soon learn, doesn't always come in the form you expect. If you've ever had a place or a creature that felt like it understood you before you spoke, take a breath and remember it now. Those memories aren't small, they're anchors. One late summer morning, long after sunrise had spilled over the ridges, Ethan would climb into a parked Jeep for a routine field tour. The air would be heavy with August heat, the kind that slows everything down. And somewhere in that shimmering grassland, a sound would rise that didn't belong. A small trembling cry that would pull him back to the boy he once was, and toward a bond that would change both their lives forever. It was supposed to be a quiet morning drive through the valley, until the forest held its breath and something small cried out for help. The Blue Ridge Mountains were still waking when Ethan Rose started his day. The forest smelled of dew and pine, and the trail roads were silvered by fog. He'd done this route 100 times before another guided tour for a handful of visitors eager to glimpse the wild heart of North Carolina. His hands moved by memory. Coffee mug on the dashboard, binoculars on the seat, notebook tucked in his pocket. The sun was still low when the Jeep rolled out past the wooden gates of the sanctuary. The radio murmured, checking in rangers across the preserve. Ethan answered, voice easy, unhurried. Everything felt ordinary, and that he would later realize was what made the moment so unforgettable, how the extraordinary always begins inside the ordinary. The Jeep rattled along the dirt track carrying 6 passengers, 2 couples from Ohio, a quiet retiree with a camera, and a mother with her young son. The boy, maybe 8 years old, leaned forward between the seats, eyes wide beneath a baseball cap. "Will we see a bear today?" he asked. Ethan smiled in the mirror. "Maybe," he said. "But around here, the mountain decides what you see, not me." The group laughed softly, the kind of laugh that belongs to early mornings. The forest was waking with them, woodpeckers, tapping cicadas, tuning up. The tall grass shimmered under the first light. As they rounded a bend near an old creek bed, Ethan slowed. Something just at the edge of his vision shifted in the distance. A ripple in the grass, then stillness. He raised a hand, signaling for quiet. The engine hummed low, and suddenly the forest felt sharper, like it had turned to listen to. Through the binoculars, Ethan scanned the clearing. For a moment, nothing, then a flicker of movement again. Small, rust-colored, a flash of ears. He whispered to the group, "Stay inside. Keep voices low." The little boy nodded solemnly, gripping his mother's hand. Ethan stepped out of boots, pressing softly into the damp earth. The air carried that cool, wild scent, wet soil moss, something living and unseen. The grass was taller than his waist. Each step made a soft rustle. He listened hard, and then he heard it. A sound so faint it might have been mistaken for wind, but it wasn't. It was the sound of hunger, of fear, a cry. Short, cracked, almost human in its pleading. Ethan crouched low, moving closer until he saw it, a tiny shape curled in the hollow of a fallen log. Fur matted, ribs showing through, eyes clouded but alive. A bobcat cub. Alone. For a second, instinct and training collided. He scanned the tree line. No sign of a mother. No adult tracks. No fresh scat. That meant one of two things. Either she had abandoned the cub, rare but possible when food was scarce, or she'd been killed, likely by a car or a territorial fight. Either way, this little one had no chance on its own. He took a slow breath. Wildlife protocol flashed in his mind. Observe first. Do not intervene unless immediate danger. But one look told him this wasn't a test of rules. It was a test of conscience. The cub tried to stand but collapsed, trembling. It made another sound, thin, desperate. Ethan removed his jacket, moving carefully. He spoke in a low tone, not to calm the animal, but to steady himself. "It's okay, little one. I've got you." Back in the jeep, the tourists watched in silence. The boy whispered, "Is it hurt?" Ethan nodded. "Weak and dehydrated." The mother's eyes softened. "Will it make it?" He hesitated, holding the tiny bundle against his chest. Its fur was rough, its heartbeat fluttering like a bird's wing. "If we get there soon enough, maybe." The jeep turned around the road, bouncing under the tires. The forest stretched out behind them, indifferent yet anciently alive. As they drove, the group stayed quiet. The mother offered her scarf to cushion the cub. The boy reached forward, just close enough to see its face. "It's like a baby cat," he murmured. Ethan smiled faintly. "Yes, but one that belongs to the wild." At the sanctuary gates, he radioed ahead. Bringing in a bobcat cub, severe dehydration, probable malnutrition, no visible injuries, roughly 6 weeks old. The response came quickly. "Copy that. Vet teams ready." Inside the clinic, fluorescent lights replaced forest light. The cub was examined with swift precision, temperature, hydration, and reflexes. Diagnosis: severely malnourished. Immediate action: IV fluids. Warmth. Observation. The vet looked up. "We'll need someone to monitor her through the night." "I'll stay," Ethan said without thinking. The vet nodded. "She's young. She'll need feeding every 3 hours." Ethan met the cub's eyes again. Pale amber, unfocused yet alert. "Then I'll learn fast." He named her Sage. Not for the color of her eyes, but for what he hoped she'd become: a survivor, wise and enduring. The first feeding was a battle. Sage refused the bottle, turned her head, and hissed weakly. Ethan stayed patient, holding her wrapped in a towel. He hummed under his breath, the same tune his mother used when storms rolled over their cabin. Soft and steady. Finally, Sage latched tiny jaw, working milk dribbling down her chin. Ethan exhaled relief, mixing with awe. It was a simple act, feeding a hungry creature, but it felt monumental, like life itself had paused to watch this fragile truce between fear and trust. That night, Ethan wrote in his logbook, "Sage first feeding successful. Still weak, heartbeat steady." Listened to her breathing for a long time after she fell asleep. He didn't add the rest, the part about how her small rhythmic breaths reminded him of his own mother's when she napped on the porch after long days, or how the world outside felt wider, as if every life was connected by some invisible thread of care. Something is humbling about rescuing a wild animal. You realize quickly that you're not the hero of the story. You're just the bridge between suffering and survival. Sage didn't know him, didn't owe him trust. Yet in that moment, their lives overlapped in a way that felt ancient, as if the forest itself had chosen to place one fragile heartbeat in his hands and whisper, "Take care of this one." And he did. Through the long hours of night, through the quiet hum of machines, Ethan stayed. Every few minutes, he'd glance at her tiny chest rising and falling, making sure the rhythm didn't falter. By dawn, Sage stirred, stretching one paw toward the edge of her blanket. It was the smallest gesture, but to Ethan it felt like hope had taken shape. We often talk about kindness as if it's a choice made in comfort, a decision to give, when it's easy. But real kindness, the kind that changes us, usually arrives when we're tired, uncertain, and scared we're not enough. In that sterile room with a trembling bobcat fighting for breath, Ethan learned that love isn't always gentle or convenient. Sometimes it's raw, instinctive, a quiet refusal to walk away. It's the same instinct that keeps mothers awake beside sick children or neighbors checking on the elderly down the street. A thread that connects every species on this earth, human or wild. By morning, the tourist who had witnessed the rescue returned to the lodge. They told others about the ranger who stopped his tour for a cry in the grass. Most people forget the story within a week. But for one boy, the child in the back seat, it planted something. Years later, he'd send a letter to the sanctuary saying he'd become a wildlife volunteer because of that day. The mountain has a way of echoing kindness even when we think it's gone. If you've ever helped a creature that couldn't speak your language, an injured bird, a stray cat, even a frightened person, remember how that moment felt. Hold on to it, because the world becomes softer each time we choose to listen to a cry in the tall grass. For Ethan and Sage, that rescue was only the beginning. Healing would take more than medicine. It would take time, patience, and a bond that neither of them could have predicted. In the nights to come, as the mountains fell quiet and the stars hung over the sanctuary, their story would deepen one sleepless hour at a time. Some rescues happen in a moment. Others unfold through 100 quiet nights, one heartbeat at a time. The sanctuary at night has its own kind of silence. Not empty, but layered. The hum of heaters, the soft drip of water lines, the faint shuffle of small paws in the dark. It's a place where the day's noise disappears and what's left is something purer, the sound of breathing, fragile but determined. That's what Ethan Rowe listened to in those first nights with Sage, a rhythm of hope, uncertain but steady. He sat by her enclosure, the glow from the heat lamp painting her fur in copper light. She was still weak ribs showing under her coat, her paws twitching as if she were dreaming of running through a world she'd never seen. Outside, the mountains slept beneath a sky full of stars. Inside, one man kept watch, eyes heavy, heart wide open. The first 48 hours after rescue are the most critical for young bobcats. Their bodies are delicate. Their systems can shut down fast. Ethan knew this from his training, but knowledge doesn't make the waiting easier. Every few hours, he checked the chart pinned to her pen. Temperature, 9.6. Hydration improving. Heart rate strong. Each number mattered, but it was the small gestures that told the real story, how she lifted her head a little higher, or how her tail flicked once when she heard his voice. He learned to read those tiny signs like a language. At midnight, he prepared her a bottle. Formula warmed just above room temperature, a drop of electrolytes, a touch of goat's milk for comfort. He wore gloves, always aware that this was still a wild creature, even if she was too young to remember what wildness meant. But when he leaned closer, her scent hit him, a mix of earth and hay and something faintly sweet. It wasn't just an animal. It was life, stubborn and small. He held her gently wrapped in a towel and began to feed her. At first, she resisted turning her head, her teeth catching the edge of the bottle. He didn't force it. He just waited. Patience, that was the first lesson Sage taught him. Outside, rain began to fall, a soft tapping against the tin roof. Ethan smiled at the sound. Rain had always been his lullaby. As Sage finally began to drink, her eyes met his. For the first time, amber and unsure. He felt a flicker of connection, fragile as a candle flame. He whispered, "You're okay. I'm right here." She couldn't understand the words, but tone transcends language. Her breathing slowed, matching his. That shared rhythm between human and wild wasn't about ownership. It was trust born in silence. When she finished, she curled against his sleeve, exhausted. He placed her back into a nest of towels and watched her sleep. Then, without meaning to, his thoughts drifted elsewhere to a dimly lit bedroom 200 miles away. His mother's voice on the phone earlier that evening still echoed in his head. "I'm fine, sweetheart," she'd said. "Just a bit tired lately." He knew that tone. It was the one parents use when they don't want you to worry. He looked at the sleeping bobcat and felt something shift inside him, a recognition that care is never just about strength. It's about showing up again and again, even when you can't fix everything. That night, he began a habit that would last for years, keeping a logbook. Entry: Day 2. Sage fed at midnight and 3 a.m. Weak but responsive. Purred once during feeding. Weight up 2 ounces. Tried to climb the towel pile. Progress is slow but sure. The words were simple, almost clinical, but between each line lived a quiet devotion. He wasn't just tracking recovery. He was building a relationship, and careful note at a time. By the 3rd night, Sage began to find her voice. A low, raspy sound, not quite a meow, not yet a growl, echoed from the crate as Ethan approached. It startled him at first. Then he laughed softly. "There you are." She was announcing herself to the world, claiming space. That's when he knew she'd decided to fight. Each evening after visitors left and lights dimmed, he'd walk the quiet halls of the sanctuary, checking on fox kits and fawns. But he always ended up back at Sage's pen. Sometimes he'd read aloud from field guides or softly hum old folk songs. It wasn't for her education. It was for her calm and his. One dawn, he found her standing for the first time, wobbly legs trembling. She took 3 steps toward him and collapsed in a heap of fur and determination. He wrote that down too. Entry: Day 5, first steps. Fell twice, got up again. Brave little soul. That simple line said more than any chart could. He cleaned her pen, replaced bedding, and adjusted heat lamps. When she slept, he sat outside with a mug of coffee, listening to the mountain wind rustle through the leaves. Every sound reminded him of something: the owls from his childhood, the creek behind his parents' lodge, the heartbeat of the world continuing whether or not we notice. There's a kind of quiet heroism in care. Not the loud kind that makes headlines, but the kind that repeats itself in the still hours, feeding, cleaning, watching, hoping. Ethan understood now why his mother once said that kindness isn't about keeping things safe. It's about helping them find their own strength. He saw that lesson come alive in Sage. Each day she resisted him less, not because she'd grown tame, but because she was learning to trust her own survival. Sometimes love looks like holding on. Other times it looks like standing back and letting another creature discover what it can do. By the end of that first week, Sage's energy began to return. She'd bat at his gloves with tiny claws, testing her instincts. Ethan would laugh, guiding her play into small exercises, encouraging balance, coordination, curiosity. At night, he'd record everything. Explored the corner today. Showed interest in the climbing post. Refused the bottle, ate minced rabbit. Progress excellent. He didn't realize it then, but these simple nights, the feeding, the waiting, the notes, were weaving something rare. A connection built not on words or promises, but on consistency. We often think strength means independence, that to be strong is to need nothing. But watching Sage taught Ethan something different. True strength is born from trust. From allowing someone to care for you until you can stand on your own again. Humans forget this. We rush to prove we can do it all alone. But the wild in its honest simplicity knows better. Even predators rely on their mothers, their pack, the rhythm of the forest. Maybe kindness isn't something we give to animals. Maybe it's something they remind us to reclaim. Late one night, as the storm rolled over the sanctuary, Ethan's phone buzzed. A message from his father. Mom's tests came back fine. Nothing serious. He sighed with relief, set the phone aside, and looked over at Sage now, asleep, chest rising and falling beneath the red lamp's glow. He thought of the way he used to check on his mother when she dozed on the porch, the same way he checked on Sage now. The parallel hit him gently, but deeply. Two homes, one heart, different lives, same love. By the 10th night, Sage could stand without wobbling. Her eyes, clear now, followed every sound, every shadow. She was growing into her wildness again. Ethan knew what that meant. Soon she'd need more space. Soon he'd have to teach her the skills that would let her return to the world she was born for. He closed the logbook, watching her stretch and yawn. "This is your world now," he whispered. "Let's get you ready for it." Outside, dawn crept over the mountains and the first birds began to sing. The forest was calling, and Sage was starting to answer. If you've ever cared for someone, human or animal, through long nights and tiny steps, remember this. Every act of patience is a kind of love story. And sometimes the quiet ones change the world the most. In the days that followed, Ethan began to teach Sage what freedom looked like. It wasn't just feeding anymore, it was movement, instinct, discovery. Soon the small enclosure would give way to open space, sunlight, and lessons in survival. Freedom can't be given, it has to be remembered. And sometimes love means teaching someone how to live without you. Morning came earlier now. The fog no longer clung to the trees, it lifted like Sage herself had decided to rise with the sun. Ethan Rose stood by the outer enclosure gate, watching as the young bobcat padded through the grass, her paws silent and sure. It had been months since the night he found her trembling in the tall grass. Now she was stronger, sleeker, her fur catching the light in shades of gold and ash. Her eyes had sharpened too alert, curious, always reading the world, as if she knew it was trying to teach her something. To Ethan, that was a kind of miracle. Not the kind that comes with trumpets or cheers, but the quiet miracle of seeing a life reclaim itself. The sanctuary had decided it was time to move Sage into a larger enclosure, a transition zone meant to prepare rehabilitated animals for release or permanent placement. Inside, the terrain was wild, by design downed logs, brush piles, rocks, tall grass. There were trees for climbing and shaded dens for rest. Ethan carried a clipboard, jotting down notes as he spoke softly into the radio. Sage 6 months, weight ideal. Mobility excellent. Beginning behavioral enrichment today. Copy that, came the reply from the observation post. Good luck, teacher. He smiled. We'll both need it. Teaching a bobcat to hunt isn't about commands or tricks. It's about awakening something ancient, the instinct buried under comfort and care. Ethan knew the danger of too much affection. If Sage became too attached to him, she might never survive in the wild. So he learned to step back. To love her by giving her distance. He started with scent trails, small trails of rabbit fur and fish oil leading through the enclosure. He'd watch from the blind, hidden behind mesh and branches, notebook in hand. At first, Sage seemed confused. She followed the trail halfway, then lost interest. But on the third day, she crouched, eyes narrowing, tail twitching. A low growl rumbled in her chest. She had found something to chase a shadow of the life she was meant for. Ethan caught his breath. He didn't cheer or move. He simply wrote, "Instinct returning." A few weeks later came her first real test. He placed a live mouse in the tall grass, a necessary step for predators in rehabilitation. Ethan hated this part. He respected both animals, the hunter and the hunted. But nature's laws don't bend to sentiment. He watched as Sage froze, muscles coiling. Her ears flicked forward, her pupils widened. In a single leap, she was motion, grace, and power, raw and precise. The grass rustled once, then silence. When she lifted her head, the wild was back in her eyes. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Good girl," he whispered, even though she couldn't hear him. That evening, he cleaned the feeding area and updated her log. First successful hunt, clean kill, fed naturally, behavior appropriate. He closed the book and stood for a while listening to the night sounds. The crickets, the steady hum of wind through pines, and somewhere beyond, the faint cry of another bobcat. He wondered if Sage heard it too, if some part of her recognized the language the way belonging calls you home, even when you don't understand the words. Later, as he locked the gates, he thought of his mother again. How years ago she'd taught him to drive an old truck down the winding mountain road. She'd sat in the passenger seat calm and quiet, her hand resting on the dashboard as he jerked through the first turns. She didn't correct him much. She just said, "You'll feel it, not think it." He smiled at the memory. The lesson was the same. Whether behind a wheel or before a wild creature, trust isn't taught through words. It's felt through patience. Days turned into weeks. Sage grew more confident, more unpredictable. She scaled the climbing posts in seconds, pounced on dangling toys with practiced precision, and sometimes vanished into the brush just to test how long it would take him to spot her. The staff began calling her the ghost cat. Ethan didn't mind. He wanted her to be elusive, to belong to the wind again. Still, some moments tested him. When she caught his scent, she'd sometimes turn her head, ears flicking in recognition. For a heartbeat, it felt like she remembered the man who once held her through the night. Then she'd look away, and the wild would reclaim her. And though it stung, Ethan knew that was right. Freedom has a cost, and it's worth every ache. There's a tenderness in letting go that no one talks about. It's not the grand goodbye that hurts most, it's the slow unraveling of daily rituals. The feeding, the soft voice, the trust built and then gently loosened. Ethan realized he was teaching Sage how to survive, but she was teaching him how to release. Every creature in his care had come and gone. Some were released, some didn't make it. But Sage, she was different. She'd forced him to look at love through a wilder lens, one that valued growth over comfort. He often wondered if the same lesson applied to people too. How parents raise children, how we care for the sick. How do we say goodbye when it's time? Maybe every form of love eventually points us toward release. In the sanctuary's staff lounge, someone once asked Ethan if he ever wished the animals could stay tame. He shook his head. That's not kindness, that's captivity. Kindness, he explained, isn't keeping a life close, it's giving it back to where it belongs. He believed that. Still, there were nights he'd stand by the gate long after closing, watching Sage's silhouette under the moonlight. She'd stalk invisible prey, every muscle alive with purpose. He'd smile proud and heartbroken all at once. Because that's the thing about genuine care. It never gets easier to give away what you've helped heal. You just learn to do it anyway. In one training session, a visiting intern asked him, "How do you know when they're ready to be released?" Ethan answered softly, "When they stop looking for you." He explained that rehabilitation wasn't about bonding, it was about balance. Too much human contact and a bobcat loses its fear. Too little and it loses its trust in survival. The art lies somewhere in between, guiding without taming. He showed the intern how enrichment tools mimic the wild, pulley toys, swinging like birds, scent puzzles, encouraging curiosity, and platforms teaching stealth and climbing. It wasn't about play. It was practice for freedom. Every movement she learns here, he said, is one less reason for her to need us later. The intern nodded, writing notes. Ethan smiled, watching Sage leap across a log. And that's how we measure success, by how little they need us in the end. That night, as he locked up the enclosures, he found himself lingering again. The forest was alive with late summer sounds. Fireflies blinked like scattered stars. Sage was perched on a fallen tree, still as stone. Her eyes reflected the moonlight, ancient and knowing. Ethan whispered through the mesh, "You're almost ready, aren't you?" She blinked once, slow and calm. Then she turned her gaze to the woods beyond the fence, as if she already knew where her path led. In that moment, Ethan felt something shift again. He wasn't just her caretaker anymore. He was her witness, the one who'd seen her become what she was always meant to be. If you've ever had to let go of someone you love, a child leaving home, a friend moving away, a pet. Finding peace, remember this. Letting go doesn't end the story. It's just the moment when love grows wings. Soon life would pull Ethan in another direction. A phone call from home, a familiar voice, and a choice that would test everything he believed about care and loyalty. For now, the mountain slept and Sage dreamed beneath the stars. Neither of them knew that their bond, once stretched across distance and years, would one day be tested in ways the heart can hardly bear. Sometimes the hardest journey isn't into the wild, it's away from it. Autumn came early that year. The air in the Blue Ridge Mountains turned crisp and golden, and the sanctuary's trails were littered with leaves that whispered underfoot. Ethan Rowe noticed it first, not in the trees, but in the way Sage's coat thickened, glowing bronze in the morning light. She had grown into her strength, a living echo of the forest itself. Every sign said she was nearly ready. Her balance, her stalking, her independence, all perfect. She no longer turned when he called her name. And that, strangely, was how he knew he'd done his job well. But as the forest prepared for winter, another kind of change was quietly making its way toward him. One that would pull him far from these mountains he loved and from the life he had built alongside her. It started with a phone call. He was in the observation cabin finishing a report when the radio on his desk buzzed, not the sanctuary line, but his personal phone. It was his father. The voice on the other end trembled. "Your mom's not doing so good, Ethan. The doctors say she'll need round-the-clock care for a while." The words landed softly, but their weight filled the room. Ethan leaned against the wall, eyes on the tree line outside. He had spent his adult life caring for wild creatures, learning to heal what others overlooked. But this was different. This was home calling him back. He whispered, "I'll be there by tomorrow." That night, as he made his rounds, the forest he skied seemed quieter. He paused at Sage's enclosure flashlight beam, catching her eyes in the dark. She was crouched on a branch, alert, beautiful, her body outlined in silver moonlight. For a moment she looked straight at him. Then she blinked once and turned away, leaping down into the grass. He felt a small ache in his chest. Maybe she already sensed the distance forming. Ethan rested his hand on the cold wire fence. "You'll be okay," he murmured. The words were meant for both of them. By morning, he had packed his truck, duffel, sleeping bag, and old coffee thermos. He left a note for the staff pinned on the bulletin board, "Family emergency. Back soon." Before driving away, he stopped once more at Sage's enclosure. She was pacing slowly near the far corner, sniffing the air. He wanted to step inside one last time to let her smell his jacket, to whisper the goodbye he couldn't quite form. But he knew that would undo weeks of hard-won independence. So instead, he just stood there watching as she climbed onto the log pile and lay down, chin on her paws. The sun had barely risen, painting the sky in pink and gold. It looked like every sunrise he'd ever shared with her. He whispered, "Be wild, little one," then turned toward the truck. As he drove away, the sanctuary disappeared behind the curve of the road, but the ache followed him, quiet and constant. Back home in Asheville, the days took on a new rhythm. Doctor appointments, medication schedules, laundry cycles. Mira. His mother smiled as best she could, but there were moments when fatigue washed over her like a shadow. Ethan built ramps, rearranged furniture, and learned how to measure doses. His hands, once steady from years of animal care, now lifted her with the same gentleness he'd used with orphaned cubs. In those long nights by her bedside, the two timelines of his life overlapped. The sound of medicine bottles clinking echoed the sound of mixing the formula for Sage. The soft hum he'd used to calm a frightened cub returned as a lullaby for his mother. The same patience that had once bridged the distance between human and wild now bridged the space between illness and love. Two homes, one heart. Care is universal. It doesn't matter whether the heartbeat you're watching over has fur or wrinkles claws or fragile hands. The act itself, the devotion, the waiting, the small victories feels the same. Ethan understood that now more deeply than ever. He'd always believed love was measured by action, feed, heal, release. But caring for his mother taught him that love is also measured by presence, the quiet kind that stays through the hard nights, not because it's easy, but because it matters. There were moments when exhaustion hit him like a wave. He'd close his eyes for just a minute and dream of the sanctuary, of Sage climbing, running free. He wondered if she remembered him. If somewhere in those mountains, a wild heart paused when the wind carried a familiar scent. Life has a way of mirroring itself. Ethan once thought his work was about teaching animals to live without human help. But now he was learning what it meant to help humans live with it, to accept care, to lean into compassion instead of fighting it. He realized that kindness isn't one-directional. It's a cycle moving between species, between generations, between moments of strength and need. We rescue and we're rescued in return. We teach others to stand, and someday they teach us how to rest. The forest calls us in many ways, and sometimes it calls us home. Weeks turned into months. His mother's condition fluctuated. Some days she'd hum the old mountain songs while he cooked breakfast. Other days, she could barely speak. Bills piled up. The sanctuary sent updates, photos of Sage, reports of her progress. Ethan pinned each one above his desk. The notes said she was thriving, strong, agile, socializing with another bobcat named Willow. He'd smile at the photos, pride mixed with longing. But when his father caught him staring one night, he said quietly, "You can't be in two places at once, son. You've done your part there. You're needed here." Ethan nodded. "I know." Still, when the house fell silent after midnight, his thoughts drifted to the mountains. He imagined the wind brushing through Sage's fur, the soft crunch of her paws on fallen leaves. He told himself she didn't need him anymore, and that was the point. But that truth didn't make the missing any easier. Viewers who follow wildlife work often ask what happens to animals when caretakers leave. The truth is, sanctuaries are built on teams' rotations, shared knowledge, recorded data. Sage's care continued without interruption. Each behavior noted, every change logged. The staff wrote that she had adapted well, but something subtle had shifted. She'd grown quieter, ate less for a while, spent hours staring toward the north fence, the direction of the road Ethan once drove down. Animal behaviorists call it separation distress. It happens when a bond based on trust, not ownership, suddenly disappears. The staff tried scent enrichment, new stimuli, and extra feeding times. Eventually, Sage settled, but a layer of restlessness remained. It mirrored Ethan's own heart. Two souls separated by duty, each learning to live with absence. There's an invisible cost to caring deeply. When you give your heart to something wild, you're always aware it may one day run out of reach. But Ethan never saw it as a loss. He saw it as faith that what he gave would continue even without him. Each morning as he brewed coffee, he'd glance at the sunrise spilling over the trees behind his parents' house. For a moment, if the light hit just right, he could almost imagine he was back at the sanctuary. And for a breath, the ache softened. The forest has many ways of calling us. Sometimes it asks us to rescue, sometimes to release, and sometimes to return. Ethan's journey was all three at once, each stage a reflection of the others. The same patience that healed a wild bobcat was now healing a family. The same quiet courage that taught Sage to survive was teaching him how to endure. In a world that moves fast, these slow, sacred labors of love are what tether us to meaning. If you've ever had to pause your own dreams to care for someone you love, remember you're not losing your path. You're walking a different one for a while. And sometimes that road, quiet, hard, human, is the most sacred path of all. Seasons passed. His mother's health began to stabilize little by little. Ethan started to think about returning to the sanctuary, though fear whispered that too much time had passed, that Sage wouldn't remember him. He didn't know that in her own way she had waited too, because the wild never truly forgets a touch born of kindness. The forest was calling again, this time toward reunion. Sometimes the hardest journey isn't into the wild, it's away from it. Autumn came early that year. The air in the Blue Ridge Mountains turned crisp and golden, and the sanctuary's trails were littered with leaves that whispered underfoot. Ethan Rowe noticed it first, not in the trees, but in the way Sage's coat thickened glowing bronze in the morning light. She had grown into her strength, a living echo of the forest itself. Every sign said she was nearly ready. Her balance, her stalking, her independence, all perfect. She no longer turned when he called her name. And that, strangely, was how he knew he'd done his job well. But as the forest pizza prepared for winter, another kind of change was quietly making its way toward him, one that would pull him far from these mountains he loved and from the life he had built alongside her. It started with a phone call. He was in the observation cabin finishing a report when the radio on his desk buzzed, not the sanctuary line, but his personal phone. It was his father. The voice on the other end trembled. "Your mom's not doing so good, Ethan. The doctors say she'll need round-the-clock care for a while." The words landed softly, but their weight filled the room. Ethan leaned against the wall, eyes on the tree line outside. He had spent his adult life caring for wild creatures, learning to heal what others overlooked. But this was different. This was home calling him back. He whispered, "I'll be there by tomorrow." That night, as he made his rounds, the forest seemed quieter. He paused at Sage's enclosure flashlight beam, catching her eyes in the dark. She was crouched on a branch alert, beautiful, her body outlined in silver moonlight. For a moment, she looked straight at him. Then she blinked once and turned away, leaping down into the grass. He felt a small ache in his chest. Maybe she already sensed the distance forming. Ethan rested his hand on the cold wire fence. "You'll be okay," he murmured. The words were meant for both of them. By morning, he had packed his truck duffel sleeping bag and old coffee thermos. He left a note for the staff pinned on the bulletin board, "Family emergency. Back soon." Before driving away, he stopped once more at Sage's enclosure. She was pacing slowly near the far corner, sniffing the air. He wanted to step inside one last time to let her smell his jacket, to whisper the goodbye he couldn't quite form. But he knew that would undo weeks of hard-won independence. So instead, he just stood there, watching as she climbed onto the log pile and lay down, chin on her paws. The sun had barely risen, painting the sky in pink and gold. It looked like every sunrise he'd ever shared with her. He whispered, "Be wild." Little one then turned toward the truck. As he drove away, the sanctuary disappeared behind the curve of the road, but the ache followed him, quiet and constant. Back home in Asheville, the days took on a new rhythm. Doctor appointments, medication, schedules, laundry cycles. Mira. His mother smiled as best she could, but there were moments when fatigue washed over her like a shadow. Ethan built ramps, rearranged furniture, and learned how to measure doses. His hands, once steady from years of animal care, now lifted her with the same gentleness he'd used with orphaned cubs. In those long nights by her bedside, the two timelines of his life overlapped. The sound of medicine bottles clinking echoed the sound of mixing the formula for Sage. The soft hum he'd used to calm a frightened cub returned as a lullaby for his mother. The same patience that had once bridged the distance between human and wild now bridged the space between illness and love. Two homes, one heart. Care is universal. It doesn't matter whether the heartbeat you're watching over has fur or wrinkles claws or fragile hands. The act itself, the devotion, the waiting, the small victories feels the same. Ethan understood that now more deeply than ever. He'd always believed love was measured by action, feed, heal, release. But caring for his mother taught him that love is also measured by presence, the quiet kind that stays through the hard nights, not because it's easy, but because it matters. There were moments when exhaustion hit him like a wave. He'd close his eyes for just a minute and dream of the sanctuary of Sage climbing, running free. He wondered if she remembered him, if somewhere in those mountains a wild heart paused when the wind carried a familiar scent. Life has a way of mirroring itself. Ethan once thought his work was about teaching animals to live without human help. But now he was learning what it meant to help humans live with it, to accept care, to lean into compassion instead of fighting it. He realized that kindness isn't one-directional. It's a cycle moving between species, between generations, between moments of strength and need. We rescue and we're rescued in return. We teach others to stand, and someday they teach us how to rest. The forest calls us in many ways, and sometimes it calls us home. Weeks turned into months. His mother's condition fluctuated. Some days she'd hum the old mountain songs while he cooked breakfast. Other days, she could barely speak. Bills piled up, The sanctuary sent updates, photos of Sage, reports of her progress. Ethan pinned each one above his desk. The notes said she was thriving, strong, agile, socializing with another bobcat named Willow. He'd smile at the photos, pride mixed with longing. But when his father caught him staring one night, he said quietly, "You can't be in two places at once, son. You've done your part there. You're needed here." Ethan nodded. "I know." Still, when the house fell silent after midnight, his thoughts drifted to the mountains. He imagined the wind brushing through Sage's fur, the soft crunch of her paws on fallen leaves. He told himself she didn't need him anymore, and that was the point. But that truth didn't make the missing any easier. Viewers who follow wildlife work often ask, what happens to animals when caretakers leave? The truth is, sanctuaries are built on teams, rotations, shared knowledge, recorded data. Sage's care continued without interruption. Each behavior noted, every change logged. The staff wrote that she had adapted well, but something subtle had shifted. She'd grown quieter, ate less for a while, spent hours staring toward the north fence, the direction of the road Ethan once drove down. Animal behaviorists call it separation distress. It happens when a bond based on trust, not ownership, suddenly disappears. The staff tried scent enrichment, new stimuli, and extra feeding times. Eventually, Sage settled, but a layer of restlessness remained. It mirrored Ethan's own heart, two souls separated by duty, each learning to live with absence. There's an invisible cost to caring deeply. When you give your heart to something wild, you're always aware it may one day run out of reach. But Ethan never saw it as a loss. He saw it as faith. Faith that what he gave would continue even without him. Each morning as he brewed coffee, he'd glance at the sunrise spilling over the trees behind his parents' house. For a moment, if the light hit just right, he could almost imagine he was back at the sanctuary. And for a breath, the ache softened. The forest has many ways of calling us. Sometimes it asks us to rescue, sometimes to release, and sometimes to return. Ethan's journey was all three at once, each stage a reflection of the others. The same patience that healed a wild bobcat was now healing a family. The same quiet courage that taught Sage to survive was teaching him how to endure. In a world that moves fast, these slow, sacred labors of love are what tether us to meaning. If you've ever had to pause your own dreams to care for someone you love, remember you're not losing your path. You're walking a different one for a while. And sometimes that road, quiet, hard, human, is the most sacred path of all. Seasons passed. His mother's health began to stabilize little by little. Ethan started to think about returning to the sanctuary, though fear whispered that too much time had passed, that Sage wouldn't remember him. He didn't know that in her own way she had waited too. Because the wild never truly forgets a touch born of kindness. The forest was calling again, this time toward reunion. 8 years apart. One wild heart. One moment that no one could have predicted. The Blue Ridge Mountains looked the same, but Ethan Rowe felt like a stranger returning home. The gravel road that led to the sanctuary wound through golden fields and tall pines, just as it always had. The wooden gate, the faded sign, even the smell of rain on soil, it all seemed untouched by time. But for Ethan, 8 years had passed. 8 years of caring for his mother, of learning patience and loss, of dreaming of a bobcat he wasn't sure would remember him. As he parked his truck and cut the engine, silence filled the air. A silence heavy with memory. He sat there for a long moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, trying to steady his breath. He wasn't sure if this was courage or foolish hope, but he needed to see her again. When he walked through the gates, familiar faces met him. Keepers, volunteers, old friends who looked at him with a mix of surprise and joy. "Didn't think we'd see you again, Ethan," someone said, clapping his shoulder. He smiled. "I didn't think I'd make it either." The sanctuary had grown a few new enclosures, a renovated clinic, but at its heart, it was the same. The same hum of life, the same wind whispering through the trees. And somewhere inside that vast living rhythm was Sage. The head keeper, now a gray-haired woman named Caroline, walked beside him. "She's still here," she said softly. "We kept her. Tried introducing her to other cats for years, but she never fully bonded. Except maybe with one, Willow, you remember her." Ethan nodded, heart pounding. "How's she been?" Caroline hesitated. "Different. Calm, but watchful. She doesn't take to new handlers, but if you're ready, we can try a reintroduction. Just don't expect too much." He understood. Sage wasn't a pet. She was a predator, a survivor, and 8 years is a lifetime in the wild. "Still," he whispered, "I just want her to know I came back." They met in the large open enclosure, the one where Sage had learned to stalk and climb years ago. The space was familiar, but changed new trees higher, fencing the scent of time everywhere. Caroline ran through the safety plan one more time. Double gates secured. Tranquilizer on standby. Ethan's exit path is marked. It was a procedure, but also a reassurance. No one wanted to believe this could go wrong, but they had to be ready if it did. Ethan waited just inside the first gate, his breath fogging in the cool air. He could feel his heart beating in his throat. Across the enclosure, a figure moved through the tall grass, sleek, powerful, silent. Sage. At first, she didn't notice him. She was perched on a low branch, muscles relaxed, eyes scanning the tree line. Her fur was darker now, her frame broader. She looked every bit the wild bobcat she was meant to be. Ethan called her name softly. "Sage." No response. He took a few slow steps forward, keeping his hands at his sides. The air between them felt thick, like something sacred was holding its breath. He said her name again, quieter this time. "Sage, it's me." She turned her head. For a long second, nothing happened. Her gaze fixed on him sharp, assessing, unblinking. Then she moved. Her body slid down from the branch, silent as shadow. Each step was deliberate, measured. Her ears tilted forward, tail low but not tense. Caroline whispered through the radio. "She's curious. Don't move too fast." Ethan nodded but didn't look away. He knew the rules, but every instinct in him wanted to reach out. Sage stopped a few feet away, sniffing the air. The muscles in her shoulders rippled beneath her coat. She took one cautious step closer, then another. Ethan stood perfectly still. The world around them disappeared. He could hear only the sound of his own heartbeat, and then a sound from her. A low, throaty rumble. Not a growl. Something else. A chuff. To the untrained ear, it might have sounded like a warning. But to those who know wildcats, it's the sound of recognition, of greeting. Her ears flattened slightly in comfort, her tail lifted halfway, and the fur along her spine stayed smooth. She circled once, keeping her eyes on him, then stepped close enough for the distance to vanish. Ethan barely breathed. Sage pressed her head against his chest, the way she had when she was small. Her paws rose, resting gently on his shoulders. He felt the weight of her, not threatening, but grounding. He whispered her name again, his voice breaking. "Sage." "My girl." The sound that came next wasn't human or animal. It was something deeper. A reunion that language couldn't hold. The staff, watching through the glass, fell silent. One of them wiped away tears. 8 years apart, and yet in that single instant, it was as if no time had passed at all. Ethan sank slowly to one knee. Sage stayed close, pressing against him, eyes half closed. Her purr was low but steady, a deep vibration that reached through the years and into the quiet place where love still lived. He had dreamed of this moment 100 times, but the reality was simpler, softer. There was no grand emotion, no cinematic swelling of music, just the rhythm of breath shared again after too long apart. He remembered her as the frail cub wrapped in a towel, her tiny paws gripping his sleeve. Now she was everything he'd hoped for, strong, free, alive. And she remembered him. That was enough. Some reunions aren't loud. They don't come with applause or explanations. Sometimes they're just two beings finding each other again in a world that thought they'd forgotten. Ethan realized then that love doesn't fade with absence, it simply changes shape. All those nights he'd spent wondering if she'd remember him hadn't been in vain. She hadn't forgotten. She'd simply been waiting in her own way, quietly, patiently, like the mountain itself. He pressed his forehead against her fur. "I missed you, Sage," he whispered. And maybe, just maybe, the soft rumble in her chest meant she was saying it back. Moments like this remind us that loyalty isn't just a human virtue. In every creature, there's a thread of connection that memory can't erase. Science calls it associative recognition, the ability of an animal to recall scent, sound, even rhythm. But Ethan knew it as something simpler, love that endures through silence. For years, Sage had survived without him, but she hadn't forgotten what kindness felt like. And maybe that's the truest kind of memory, the kind that lives not in the mind, but in the heart. Over the next few days, Ethan stayed on site to help with routine checks. Sage, now settled, began behaving differently, more alert, more playful. The keepers noticed she ate better, moved more, and even rested beside Willow again. It was as if his presence had reopened something gentle in her. Ethan didn't overstay. He knew this wasn't his world anymore. His role was to remind, not reclaim. Before leaving, he visited her enclosure one last time. Sage lay on a rock under the morning sun, eyes half closed. He whispered, "Stay wild, sweetheart. You're home." She lifted her head briefly, blinking in the light, then turned toward the forest beyond the fence where a breeze stirred the tall grass. He smiled. That was her answer. Not all endings are sad. Some are simply quiet acknowledgments that what you built was strong enough to stand without you. Ethan walked back down the trail, the same one he'd driven all those years ago. Only this time the ache in his chest felt lighter. He'd come full circle from rescue to reunion, from fear to freedom. Love, he realized, doesn't always ask to stay. Sometimes it just asks to be remembered. If you've ever been reunited with something or someone you thought you'd lost, hold that memory close tonight. It's proof that time can't undo what was built with care. And maybe somewhere a part of the wild still remembers you too. Sage's story didn't end there. In the months that followed, she would thrive again, stronger, calmer, and no longer alone. And Ethan, now back at the sanctuary, would find new purpose in guiding others to care with the same quiet devotion he once gave her. Because love, like the forest, never truly ends. It just finds new places to grow. The forest was quiet again. Not the kind of quiet that comes from absence, but the kind that follows understanding. The sanctuary's days had found a gentle rhythm. Morning feedings, the low murmur of volunteers, the steady heartbeat of life continuing. Ethan Rowe walked that rhythm now, not as the man who once rescued a bobcat, but as someone who had learned what true rescue really means. He no longer rushed through the corridors or lingered by Sage's enclosure. He simply moved with the calm assurance of someone who had come full circle. Sage had changed too. She spent her mornings stretched out on sun-warmed rocks and her afternoons pacing along the edges of the tall grass, every muscle relaxed but ready. Sometimes when the wind carried a familiar scent, she'd glance toward the gate, blink slowly, and then return to the business of living. She didn't wait anymore, and neither did he. That Ethan thought was the truest sign of healing. In the months after their reunion, Ethan decided to stay on at the sanctuary as a mentor. He helped new interns learn the quiet art of rehabilitation, patience without attachment, compassion without control. He showed them how to listen to the animals, to the weather, to themselves. "Every creature tells you what it needs," he'd say. "You just have to learn to hear it." His favorite part of the day came at dusk. The valley would glow gold, the trees catching the last of the light. He'd sit on the porch steps, notebook in hand, writing down the small things that gave the day meaning. Sage caught her own dinner again. Willow followed her lead. 2 deer crossed the stream at sunset. Calm winds tonight. They were small entries, but each one was a prayer of gratitude disguised as observation. One evening, a young volunteer named Leah approached him. She was new, barely 20, full of questions and worry. "How do you do it?" she asked. "How do you love them and let them go?" Ethan smiled, remembering his own trembling hands years ago. "You don't let them go," he said. "You let them become, and then you trust the wild to take care of the rest." He led her to the enclosure fence where Sage and Willow rested in the grass. "Look at them," he whispered. "They're not waiting for anyone anymore. That's how you know you did it right." Leah nodded, tears glinting in the dim light. "It's hard." "It should be," he replied softly. "If it never hurt, it probably wouldn't be real." That night, as he locked the gates, he thought about how many times life had asked him to release something he loved. His parents, his work, his animals, and how every time what returned wasn't emptiness, but clarity. There's a strange grace in endings. We resist them, fight them, fear them, but sometimes endings are simply the earth making room for something else to grow. Ethan understood now that love was never meant to be a cage. It was a current moving through us, shaping us, then moving on. He used to think he was the teacher guiding creatures like Sage back to their natural instincts. But in truth, they had been teaching him all along. Sage showed him that strength could live inside gentleness. His mother had shown him that care could exist without words. The mountain had shown him that silence is not absence, but presence in its purest form. Each of those lessons had carved him into the person he was meant to be, not a rescuer, but a witness. Someone who saw the sacredness in the ordinary. He realized that maybe the most soulful stories aren't about saving others, but about remembering what's worth saving inside ourselves. The world often praises speed, get more, do more, move faster. But nature moves differently. The mountain doesn't rush to green after winter. The river doesn't apologize for its detours. The bobcat doesn't question its solitude. It simply listens and acts when the moment feels right. Ethan started shaping his life around that rhythm. He took fewer calls, spent more time outdoors. Some evenings, he sat under the stars, letting the night settle around him like a familiar blanket. The air was cool, the crickets steady, the sky wide open. He would close his eyes and think about the winding path that had brought him here. The boy with the wounded owl. The man who found a starving cub. The son who left to care for his mother. The caretaker who returned to find forgiveness in the eyes of the wild. All those versions of himself now stood quietly together inside him, not competing, not fading, just whole. He had learned that kindness doesn't end when the rescue is done. It keeps moving through the world, like ripples in a quiet pond, touching places we'll never see. A few weeks later, he joined a local community program, teaching children about wildlife safety and compassion. During one visit, a little girl asked him, "Do animals really remember us?" Ethan knelt to her level, smiling. "Sometimes. But what matters most is that we remember them, their space, their needs, their freedom. Because that's how we show love, even when they're far away." He handed her a feather from the sanctuary, a single gift from a world most people never touch. She held it as if it was something magical. Watching her, Ethan thought, maybe this is what it means to live with purpose, to keep passing the quiet things forward. Love had taken so many shapes in his life, his mother's hands, the steady breath of a bobcat, the weight of silence after a long goodbye. Each form taught him that real connection isn't measured by time spent together, but by how deeply we let something change us. The wild had changed him. It had stripped away everything unimportant until all that remained was the truth that life is precious, fragile, and endlessly capable of beginning again. He once thought rescue meant holding on. Now he knew it meant freeing with tenderness, not fear. And in that realization, the ache in his heart finally softened into peace. Sometimes Ethan would walk the sanctuary trails at dawn, long before visitors arrived. Mist curled through the trees and the world felt suspended between dream and daybreak. He'd stop near the hill where he first saw Sage years ago and whisper, "Thank you." Not because she was gone, but because she had stayed in the only way that mattered, in the lesson she left behind. We don't always get to choose the endings of our stories, but we do get to choose how we carry them, whether we let them close us off or open us wider to love again. For Ethan and for all who choose kindness in a world that forgets how to listen, the answer was simple: love without fear, release without regret, and live gently in the space between. Maybe this story reminds you of someone or something you once cared for deeply, a person, a pet, a place that still lives quietly inside you. Take a moment tonight to reach back to that memory. Let it remind you that your capacity for kindness is still there. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the power of love, loyalty, and the quiet wisdom of nature, please take a second to like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who could use a little peace today. And if you'd like to do something even more meaningful, consider leaving a super thanks or small donation below. Every bit helps us rescue, rehabilitate, and release wild animals, especially bobcats, so they can live free just as Sage did. Your kindness helps stories like hers continue. Because in the end, every act of compassion, no matter how small, teaches us how to live.